You've done that. So yeah, a quick intro to Errol. Errol Fox is a human rights-centered and humanitarian designer. They have more than 10 years experience in companies and NGOs and have worked internationally on some of the toughest humanitarian problems, including crisis response, peace building, democracy, and human rights. Errol is dedicated to helping organizations stay focused on the problems experienced by the people they serve. Welcome to GDCFP Day, Errol Fox.
Thank you very much.
Go for it. Let me put your slides up. Have you shared them?
Oh, look at that. Me forgetting to do an essential part of the process.
That's
there
cool.
We
go. Go for it. Thank you.
Okay. So, hey, everyone. I am here to talk about caring for your audience and ways to be inclusive with your talks. So on screen right now is the title text of Caring for Your Audience, Ways to be Inclusive with Your Talks, and an illustration of a pink fox. The other part of the slide is a link to be able to access these slides and the speaker notes with them at a URL, which is http://bit.ly/caring-EF. So on screen right now is an image of myself with a microphone and text with details about myself. I'm Errol, my pronouns are they, them, and I've been working in digital product design and user experience for around 10 years. And I've spent 7 years doing various different humanitarian or third sector work. And I've been working on and contributing to open source software for around 3 years, maybe more like 4 years right now. I'm also working towards a PhD, which researches the relationship between designers who work on humanitarian for good open source software projects and how generally designers participate in open source software. And as Sue said, I call myself a human rights-centered designer or a humanitarian designer. On screen right now is an image of green pears alongside a logo for the Open Food Network and the text that introduces the organization, the Open Food Network. I now do design at the Open Food Network, where I work on their open source software technology to enable new ethical supply chains where communities can bring together producers and create virtual farmers markets and build resilient local food economies. The Open Food Network doesn't just maintain and support an open source software platform that allows these producers to globally sell their produce in some cases and people to buy from them, but really enables and nourishes a global community focused on learning, understanding, and improving how we as humans consume and care for the planet through the produce that we consume. So that was a little bit of background about me, but important in the first thing that I want to talk about is how when you have your profile slide within your talks, you can choose to indicate your own intersections of identity and how within your profile slide of your talk, you can start to share with your audience who you are and how to connect with that audience and show that you care. So on screen right now is another example of a profile and intro slide that is different to the one that I used to introduce myself just now. It's got a photo of myself alongside introduction text, which reads, "Hi, I'm Errol," with a phonetic spelling of my name, and that I'm a humanitarian designer, human rights designer, the years that I've been in digital product design and UX and nonprofit work, then my pronouns, and my preferred title, which is MX, not MS or MRS or any of the other kinds of titles that you may have seen. It then goes on to say that I am a non-binary person. I identify as trans. I'm white. I'm queer. I'm a carer for parents/children. and I have an invisible disability or illness, which is PTSD in this case. So one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about profile slides is how using your profile slide, you can choose to be inclusive within the information that you give on your profile slide. And this can help you build that connection and care for your audience. So this is the profile slide that I use when I speak specifically about diversity in design and technology. And I really felt that it was important to introduce myself and spend time detailing my own thoughts on my intersectionalities, my identity, in relation to the topic that I was talking about, the diversity in design and technology. What I would like to say on the last comment on profile slides and how this can be inclusive for your audience and help you care for your audience is to consider what information you're putting on your profile and how it could potentially put you at risk, and that your safety is very important, as well as that ability to connect and care for your audience. So what I'd like to suggest is that you think about what you feel comfortable saying in your profile information and how it relates to the talk that you are presenting to people, to that audience, and what it could mean. But not that it's essential, not that it's something that you have to do to be able to do this, that to just further explicitly state that your safety is also very important. The next part about caring for your audience I'd like to speak about are content warnings. And this helps you to prepare audiences and prepare people for the content that you will be speaking about in your talks. On screen now is an example of some content warnings that I have used in one talk, which is about humanitarian user experience research. And content warnings are always recommended to do in all of your talks, regardless of how innocuous or how non-tricky the topic might be that you're talking about, because you can never know what people who are attending your talk have experienced. And it's a very caring action to cover what you know you will speak about, and that those topics could be difficult for some people in the audience to hear and experience from your talk. I would like to remind you that you can give yourself permission to not know that a particular topic might be hard for somebody, and to take in that feedback if somebody does say to you after your talk, hey, I'd really like you to include this within your content warnings if you are talking about this, if it's something that you didn't put in there initially. So the example on screen at the moment, the content warnings detail things like violence against partners and domestic abuse and domestic violence, mental health related topics, suicide, terrorism, guns, political violence, natural disasters, missing people, PTSD, COVID-19, power dynamics between citizens of countries formerly colonialized, racism, education and social status, prejudice. I also take the opportunity within the content warning slide to sometimes ask the audience members respect a no photos please on certain slides, so that the audience knows that these are the slides where some data protection needs to be adhered to with the people that have agreed to be used in slides, but not agreed to be distributed by individuals, maybe taking photos of the talk slides that you are presenting to them. So that's another great place to be able to let your audience know how they can care for you and the people and the subjects and the people that you're talking about within your talk, as well as you caring for them by being really explicit and really careful with the kinds of topics you'll be talking about. On screen at the moment is another example of some content warnings from the diversity and design talk that I've given numerous times. There's a slightly shorter list here, which is misgendering, ableism, racism, visual representations of transgender people, LGBTQIA+ representation, and ageism. And The thing that I would like to say about content warnings and content warning slides is that saying these out loud can be really difficult at first, even for yourself as well as your audience. But with practice and care, this does become easier, and it becomes a part of just how you naturally build the content of your talks. As well as me saying in the last slide that you might not always know exactly the kinds of topics that could be harmful or could be upsetting for audience members, it's really difficult that unless your talk is scripted and structured in a particular way, you could quite naturally move into areas that have not been content warned at the start. So just again, give yourself that permission to know that you've done your best with your content warnings and that you can always include things in the next version of your talk, and that it's not that you haven't cared enough to include things that you couldn't have known, that you've done your due diligence by including content warnings of some description. So within the content warnings slide, after I introduce myself and then the content warnings, I often then invite the audience to do what they need to do to be safe and comfortable. And that is including but not exclusive to leaving the room at any time they need, or muting a digital online presentation. And generally just doing what they need to do, whether that is leaving the room or stopping from viewing that talk, or doing what they need to do to not see or hear content that they don't want to. And that I always try and create a zero judgment environment as best I can, of doing what is needed, and including inviting others within that space, especially if it's a physical space with audience members sat next to each other back in pre-digital conference times, to invite those audience members to not question people that might leave, or question people that might do what they need to do to feel comfortable, and to care for each other within the audience as well. So just to cover what is visually represented on the slide with these content warnings, there is an illustration of 6 different people of varied skin tones, hair colors, and visible disabilities present on this slide with the diversity in design content warnings. So on the screen right now is a group photo image of a community group from Kibera in Nairobi, and they're smiling at the camera with raised arms. There is a no photos and copies please on this slide. And the title says working with trauma in design activities, and has a Facebook link to the community project, which is facebook.com/Polycom Development Project, and that's Polycom spelled Polycom Development Project in the URL. This is an image from a talk and some work that I did in Errol around building technology for peace building. And because of the nature of the work that I do in the human rights space, it's really critical for me to ensure that people who are listening understand what will be talked about and ensure their own safety and comfort, as well as the comfort of the people that I'm talking about within these topics. So on the screen right now is a zoomed out image of a user journey map, which is a design activity from the workshop with the community group pictured in the last slide. And this is where in this work that I did and in this talk that I gave, I was showing examples of how the participants had used this activity to map a dangerous incident. And the topics that were mapped were topics like kidnapping, civil unrest, and many more difficult topics. So my last comment on the complexity of content warnings is that you can have this good idea of these topics that are covered and that will be difficult to engage with, but you're likely to discover more that you can include in your content warnings and within the preparation for the various slides of your talk. The best way that I have discovered to start writing content warnings and preparing people for the difficult parts of content of your talks is if you ask yourself the question, could this topic raise trauma for somebody who is listening? Then it's likely a good idea to include it in your content warnings. Moving on to inclusive imagery in your presentations. So imagery that you use across your presentations sends a message to your audience. And I know how difficult, I know as much as many other people that create talks, how difficult it can be to find free resources or accessible resources for talks without having the ability or the resources to pay for photography or illustrations. And often, you know, paying for these resources doesn't cross our minds when we're creating talks, especially if we're starting out. So then it's even harder to find inclusive imagery to ensure your audience is well represented and that you're caring for your audience in a visual representation kind of way too. But you can be intentional with your choice of imagery. And I'd like to show some examples from the diversity and design talk about how through being intentional with your choice of imagery, you can increase the representation of people across your content so that you can be more inclusive and more caring towards people. So these examples on screen right now was how an illustration of how I was trying to increase diverse representation in my illustration work for my job. And I realized that creating visual resources and finding visual resources was only really restricted by my own ability to restrict myself. And there was no reason why I couldn't make that extra effort to ensure that they were more widely representative of different people that could be listening to that talk, as well as from this example on the screen right now, the work that I was creating for the company I was working at the time. These illustrations were to be used in some of the projects there. But it made me think about how this can also be true of the presentations and the talks that you're giving and the assets that you're using within those talks. So on screen right now is an image of a family with different dark to light skin tones and different visible disabilities and physical shapes. This was one of my first attempts to draw diverse representations of humans. So I've definitely come a long way since this a number of years ago. This was my understanding of diverse representation. And there's always more that can be done to increase the diversity of people that you're representing within your talk content, should you be using visuals. And I just wanted to show a close-up of two of the figures in that illustration to show how you can subtly include different ways of including diverse imagery within the assets that you're using in your talks. So there's a close-up of one of the figures that has a hearing aid type device in their ear within an older person's physical representation, and another figure that is wearing dark glasses and holding a red and white striped cane for one of the other figures, which is representative of communities or some people that choose to use these glasses or canes that are deaf and blind, or hearing impaired and sight impaired. And the use of photography can also be carefully considered within your talks as well. So this slide has an example of another project that I worked on that I was talking about in the diversity and design talk, where there's an illustrative visual, which is quite heavily gendered in a very gender traditional kind of way. There's lots of pink and lots of physical sort of characteristics of what we typically understand of a woman. But also within this piece of work, I was requested to make a photo-based visual, and the photos that were commonly used by similar organizations within this project depict young people in school uniforms with dresses in sandy landscapes holding buckets, and other similar figures in school or class settings. And when I was working on this project, I had a feeling that these images were not good to use for that project. And after some research and conversations with people that were living near those communities where our audience was, I was then able to get confirmation that these images that were widely used were not representative of the community that was intended to consume these visuals. And even though this is an example from a project and then a subsequent talk within that project, I think it really shows how you can inquire as to whether the standard imagery or the imagery that you might immediately think of using might not be the best imagery to use to be well representative of the people that are listening to your talks and listening and looking at the imagery that you're using. And after doing lots of different searches and having conversations with people for the project, I was able to find images that were much more representative of the people that would be consuming that those pieces of work. And I really advocate for anyone that's creating visual assets alongside any content to look on Instagram on a geolocation like hashtag, or do a image search on a search website and look at the locations for different kinds of the people that you want to connect to. And this was how I found more accurate representations of the audience members that I wanted to do right by in the imagery that I was using. So on screen right now are images of young dark-skinned people with long braided hair and tied back hair looking at mobile phones. And after I showed these images to my intended audience, I received much more positive reactions. Going into a slightly trickier topic, especially for myself. On screen right now are 7 images, which are results from stock image search, site search for a term called that I entered as trans person. And from the top left to right are gender and sex symbols with the plus symbol and the arrow that you might be familiar with. Rainbow 3D rendered DNA sort of image, an image of a person holding a photo in front of their torso or chest of a body in a bra and underwear, and them presumably naked behind. 2 figures from behind wrapped in a rainbow pride flag holding hands, a rainbow pride flag in the wind, and then an artistic rainbow illustration. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, a close-up side shot of a person with a dark beard, red lips, and red long nails in a sort of shush, be quiet motion with their finger in front of their lips. And it becomes really difficult when we want to start to find ways to depict non-cisgendered people within the imagery that we choose. And when we do simple searches on sites where we might want to find resources, we can find images that have complex and potentially harmful meanings. And the advice that I would offer here is that gender diversity has no standard visual code, has no standard visual representation of the humans that might consider themselves and identify as gender non-conforming or non-cisgendered. And when you're using images of humans that you want to, where you want to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus spectrum, there is no real way of knowing from this visual alone. And the best way of being representative of LGBTQ plus folks in the imagery that you might use for talks are finding specific photo sets of people that do identify on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And one of the great resources that I can share in the chat after the talk is Mapbox's Queer in Tech photo set, which is on a blog link that from a blog post that they've created, Mapbox. And my second piece of advice within these kinds of images are to be careful when using symbol imagery, such as the rainbow pride flag. It's changed a lot in recent years, actually, to include new black and brown stripes for marginalized races and ethnicities, and the pink, white, and light blue stripes for the transgender flag to be inclusive. So you might think that you're being inclusive and representative by including a pride flag for a talk that might be focusing on inclusive, where you want to be inclusive, but actually without that piece of research and without that insight to the new versions of the rainbow flag, then you could easily make a mistake and be less inclusive by not doing that piece of research. It's always good to ask the communities that you're trying to represent within the talk content that you have whether this actually works for them. So you can always test things beforehand when you're doing first versions of your talks. Is, hey, I tried to represent these communities effectively and in a caring way through these images. What does everyone that's just experienced this talk think? So one great way of finding out whether it works for people is to ask the communities that you intend to represent. On screen right now is a photo taken from meetup.com of the London Pugs meetup. And I really like to show this image as an example of how you can include lots of different kinds of imagery within your talks, within your presentations that you're creating, because it shows many different kinds of people holding pugs. And it is what it is. It's the London Pugs meetup. And it is an accurate description, accurate depiction of what you want to show within the image. If you're doing a talk maybe about anything that is to do with maybe pugs and London Pugs meetups or anything of that nature. But if you were to use this image within that talk content, then it is an as accurate an image to use for that content as you could possibly get, because it's true, it's representative of the community that you would be talking about. And from this image, I like to encourage people to create, find, and use images that are representative of the truth over more what you could call traditionally visually pleasing images, or maybe things from stock sites. Have a look and see how much effort you can put into finding true imagery of what you are talking about. I'm moving away from visual content now to written content and covering a few things around written content. And one thing that you might have noticed me doing, as best I possibly can, I'm still practicing getting really good at this, is I've been describing slides that have visual content out loud. So saying what is visually depicted out loud, as well as having the visuals on screen. And this is great to do, as not everyone will be able to see your visuals for whatever reasons that might be. And if the visuals are really important to your talk content, you want to make sure that everyone can experience it. And this also includes URLs. And it feels very strange at first to read out the entirety of a URL. But for the people that need it, the people that can't see that you've included a URL, but do want to still go to that URL and visit your supplementary content, taking the time to read out that URL is going to be really great for those people. And of course, wouldn't you want everyone to be able to experience your content that you've prepared? So what you might need to do is prepare extra time for your talk content when you are describing the visuals out loud, as well as the different topics that you want to talk about within your talk. So just make sure that you time your talk well and include the descriptions of your slides within your speaker notes, as well as on screen as best you can. So one thing about connected to written content and visual content is around making sure that your visuals and slide design is clear and high contrast. And this is another way to ensure that your audience is comfortable and cared for. So using short sentences with clear language and visual consistency really ensures that folks who need that to fully engage with your talk get what they need. And this is a certain art. It's maybe going to take a little while for you to get a visual balance to your slides that you are comfortable with, but I encourage you to keep looking at great examples and keep trying to make sure that you are being clear with high contrast and as accessible as possible. With written content, again, and connected to language as well, is writing out acronyms in the long form ensures that everyone in your audience, regardless of the familiarity with the subject matter, can understand and enjoy your talk. And we cannot assume that what anyone knows, we can't assume that everyone who is in attendance knows what a certain acronym means or is familiar with the term. And often, generally, even if we are familiar with the acronym, it actually sometimes makes it harder to take in the information as an acronym, even if you know that term. And the audience members have to deconstruct that acronym's meaning before taking in the information. So I always encourage you to write out acronyms in their full worded versions. This next part about language and specifically multilingual people that are in your audience is again something that I'm still learning about how to do a lot better. But remember that not everyone in your audience will have the same level of comfort in the language that you are presenting in as any other person that they might be sat next to. And that might be because they are listening in their second, third, fourth, fifth language. Or it could be for some other reason that we won't know or will never know. But don't assume a level of comfort in the language that you're speaking in is shared universally. And make sure that the pace and tone and clarity of your words is really practiced so you keep everyone included. An example of this on screen at the moment is some content from the diversity and design talk that I gave about gendered language in different native languages. And you can find out more about the article that I referred to, a URL, which is http://bit.ly/gendered-lang. So gendered-lang. And the images of two cats, one with a blue background and one with a red background, and one is a he cat and one is a she cat. And it's talking about some of the language, some of the languages which have gendering historically within different words. So we can talk about French and we can talk about German and some of the other different languages across the globe within this topic. So yeah, it's a tricky subject, but it's one to be aware of as you're building different content for your talks. The last thing that I will say about caring for your audience and all the different things that I've learned is I'd like to say how important it is to offer links to your slides and content online for those that prefer to use those resources to follow along. So perhaps they need to save bandwidth from your video share, but still want to listen. And perhaps they want to read certain parts again. Perhaps they want to check over some information that you gave or a link that you gave access to. But whatever the audience needs to do to better understand your content is always worth giving easy access to that. And the other thing that I would just like to finish on is that not everyone is privileged with the ability to focus solely on talks without distractions, especially when we're talking about online talks as we are now. And distractions are a part of life, and there's absolutely no shame in that. And if you want to go back and look at slides to see something that you had to miss a certain section of, being able to give people access to that is really caring and inclusive for your audience. So with that, I'd like to say thanks for listening. And here on screen at the moment is some places you can find me on the internet, mostly at Errol Does Design, Errol spelled E-R-I-O-L. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, GitHub, and Medium on Errol Does Design or Errol Fox. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Errol.